Hello, my name is Donna Marie, health coach, yogi, and death doula. I'm also the host of the Best Life of Wellbeing podcast, designed to encourage you to focus on your overall well being by stepping out of your comfort zone and stepping into embracing your whole life in order to live fully and die peacefully. Today's conversation is with my beautiful and amazing cousin, Christina Hill, director of the Thibodeauxville documentary. She and her crew of AKA sisters joined forces to create this documentary, which should be released by the end of the year. Christina and I talk about why she loves New Orleans, a bit about her end of life plan, and a whole lot more.
Cash Money Records taking over for the 99 in the 2000s.
Yes, yes. We gonna stop it right there before we get too deep in that mix.
Yes.
Welcome, cousin Christina Hill.
Thank you for having me, cousin.
I am so excited. Thank you for agreeing to be here today. So again, my cousin Christina Hill, screenwriter, marketing director, engineer, AKA, but most importantly, you are working on this amazing documentary, Thibodeauxville. And so part of what I want to talk about today is your documentary, Thibodeauxville, but a whole lot more. So I want to start off by just allowing you the opportunity to introduce yourself to my audience.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, cousin, for having me. I am Christina Hill, and I like to say that I am an engineer by education, a marketer by profession, and a seeker of truth and justice in my heart. And so that is where I like to focus my storytelling, being a storyteller and making sure that we tell our stories. Because if we don't tell them, someone else will, and they will probably be erroneous. So that's a little about me. Most importantly, I was born into a fabulous family that allows me to be related to one Miss Donna Marie. So.
What I found interesting as I was reading your bio, Christina's mission as a screenwriter is to create timeless, authentic content that changes lives, challenges stereotypes, alters perceptions, and elevate artistic expression. Though we started off with a juvenile backing that thing up, this is part of this conversation is going, all of it really is a very, very serious conversation. Even the purpose of me adding that song. And so you're from Thibodaux, Louisiana.
I am.
And also you learned about this story of the Thibodaux Massacre. Is it when you were in high school?
Yeah, so at some point in high school, someone brought up the story of the Thibodaux Massacre, that there were some sugarcane laborers who were killed. And I grew up very close to a sugarcane refinery. So for whatever reason, I decided that it must have happened somewhere near where I grew up. But the story was relayed to me in, I often say it was more as fiction as opposed to fact. So in other words, it was like, yeah, this thing happened and some Black people was killed, but there just weren't a lot of details around what exactly happened, when it happened, and who did what, and was anybody held accountable. So for a long time, it just felt like it was folklore. I didn't know if there was any truth to it. And so fast forward many, many years later, when I was bitten, what I like to say, bitten by the bug, the writing bug, one of the things that stayed with me was this story of this massacre, not knowing if it had really happened or not. I wanted to do something, and my parents then told me that, hey, this guy wrote a book, the gentleman by the name of Mr. John DeSantis wrote a book about the Thibodaux Massacre, about the 1887 sugarcane labor strike, shall I say, that resulted into what we call now the Thibodaux Massacre. And so at that moment, I thought, okay, well, it's been done. There's nothing for me to say, nothing more for me to do. But it just stayed with me still, even though this book was now written, the stories just stayed with me. And so when I was in a position to do so, I decided that I wanted to do a documentary. So I optioned the rights to the book. And by optioning the rights to book, basically, it gave me a starting point. And as I then asked him for resources, and Mr. DeSantis was very helpful, asking for more resources, understanding who he spoke to, and digging a little bit deeper, I realized that it was just the tip of the iceberg. There was a much deeper story to be told. And he was in agreement that he's a white man from, I think originally from Canada, but had lived in New York and then moved to Southern Louisiana, but not a native. And being a native of Thibodaux, where this all occurred, and being a Black woman, he thought that it would be great for me to tell this story. And as I talked to more of the families that were related to victims, they too felt like there was more perspective to be added to the story. So that's how I got to doing Thibodeauxville.
I can't imagine what it's like having conversations with these families, because, you thought it was folklore. And many of the families, you talk about how there are 15,000 people residing in the Thibodaux area. Am I right?
Approximately, yes.
And approximately 60% of those people are white.
Mm-hmm.
And, those people have, generational wealth because of the unfair treatment dating back before this labor strike and massacre occurred. But I can't imagine what the stories were like as you were having conversation with people. This information had been buried in their psyche and for generations. Tell me a bit about how those interviews have been for you, and how you've perceived them as others are being interviewed.
Well, before I started on this project, I wanted to talk to my parents and kind of get their buy-in, their permission, their support. And the reason I did that is because I recognize that, this is not a story that I learned in Louisiana history.
Right.
And so a lot of people may have heard the story, they may have heard versions of the story, but it's certainly not something that they necessarily advocate for bringing up. In fact, one of the things that Mr. John DeSantis has said with regards to his book is, people ask him, why did you want to rehash the past? And he said, I don't think it was hashed in the first place. And that's one of the things that I felt like I wanted to make sure my parents were okay with me hashing the story, because they still live in the community. They have friends and loved ones and folks that they commune with right there. And I didn't want there to be any backlash for them. And so when you ask how was it talking to some of the descendants of those who were involved in the massacre, I think it's been a learning experience for a lot of us. So there were people who were actively doing research on their own about this incident, the labor strike and the massacre. There were people who had been, there are people right now who are looking to do their own creative works. And I highly encourage it, because, there's not just one way to tell a story, right? We were talking about in Sunday school, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right. They all had the same stories to tell, but told them very differently. So I definitely encourage more people to tell this story and other stories. So, but in talking to family members, I think in a lot of ways, it has encouraged them to learn for themselves, to learn more for themselves. I will say the Jack Conrad descendants, for example, Miss Willetta Ferdinand, she's written her own book about Jack Conrad, her ancestor, who was basically the catalyst for us even knowing that this thing actually happened. So with Jack Conrad, in order to get his military pension, he had to explain how it was that he was injured. He had been shot. What happened? He was the one who said that this massacre had occurred in Thibodaux. He was shot 5 times and he ultimately survived. And because of his pension records, and deposition, we're able to say this is something that actually happened. Now, as we've pulled back the onion a little bit over the years, we're starting to see, yeah, there is more evidence of this. We have access to newspapers that we didn't once have access to. So there's a lot of resources that have corroborated that this thing happened. How it was reported varies. But I think for a lot of the people involved, it has given them an opportunity to learn more about their own families. And I know I'm going a bit on a tangent, but one of the things that was important for me, or what is important for me in telling this story, is that we understand our greatness.
Yeah.
We understand our resilience. I understand fully that a lot of people don't want to talk about this episode because as in any areas of our history, many areas of our history, some things are very painful. People don't want to talk about that. It brings shame. It brings some people guilt. Some people may not feel guilty at all. And we're wondering, why don't you feel a little guilty?
Right.
There's a lot that is associated, like you said, a lot of feelings, trauma, emotions that are associated with talking about our past. But I am a firm believer that, if we don't talk about our history, we're bound to repeat it. I want people to know, especially young Thibodauxans coming up behind me, to know that we come from a resilient people. We come from a courageous people. We come from people who stood up for themselves and demanded that they were treated better, that they got better payment. They wanted to be able to create generational wealth and have something for their families. And so in a nutshell, I think what the interviews have done is they've given me a level of insight that I didn't previously have. They've allowed me to connect with people that I didn't previously know. And it allows them to, again, do their own research and determine for themselves how they see these events.
As you're talking, one of the things I think about, is when we bury pain, it doesn't go away. It's still there. And we're not conscious of it. We bury it and we still respond and react and are triggered by that pain. We don't know the root cause of the pain because we buried it. But the way to heal is to, like you said, peel back those layers on that onion and deal with it. And it could be ugly, it could be painful, it could, make you angry. But the only way to reconcile, to resolve, to get healing is to just dig up those emotions. It's so good to hear that people are doing their own research. Part of the massacre was designed to silence people. You don't stand up for yourself. You don't have any rights. You don't have any place. We are the power structure here. Sugarcane workers already knew where the power resided. They also recognized the power within themselves. And despite the consequences, Black people have stood up and they're courageous. So it's good to tell the story about people in Thibodaux.
You mentioned about healing, and one thing that I've heard someone say, time doesn't heal all wounds, work does. And so we have to do the work. And that's 1887 seems like it was so long ago. But again, when you start looking at the issues at hand, you start looking at things like labor strikes. This past October, it was called Striketober because of so many labor-related strikes that were occurring. You look at the question about people saying, I deserve to get paid more money for the work that I am doing. You can have a bad season, planter, but that should not impact how much I get paid for the work that I am doing. And so we're having conversations now about what it means to be an essential worker, what it means to have a livable wage. What does it mean to increase the minimum wage? We have conversations about race. Let's not skirt around it. most of the growers of the region were white, and most of the laborers of the region were Black. So these were families and people coming off of, you're about a little more than, 20 years post enslavement. You're about 10 years or so post Reconstruction. So there's this feeling of animus towards this labor class that is now asking for rights, demanding rights, when previously they had no opportunity to make demands. Right. You have people saying during Reconstruction, you had a lot of Black people in Thibodaux, including that were very actively involved politically. They were active in the police juries. They were coroners. They were appointed to other positions by the governor. They were in elected positions. And so you had a large group of other people saying, wait a minute, so how does this work? We're the power structure, not them. And if we don't get this under control right now, then we're going to have them thinking they're in charge for the rest of their days. And that was a large part of the conversation. And we see that happening right now, right? We see questions about voting rights and who should be allowed to participate in the political process. All of these things are coming back up because we don't want to do the work. Right. We think time is just going to heal the wounds. Time isn't going to heal the wounds. We have to do the work associated with it. So I just wanted to throw that out there when you mentioned healing. In this story of Thibodeauxville, and there's a whole reason why I named it Thibodeauxville. There's a whole reason I have the E in it versus the way we spell it now. So I can talk about that. But in the story of Thibodeauxville, like I said, we are seeing a lot of themes that are very relevant today. That was 1887. It'll be 135 years this year. And we are still seeing some of those themes come up, which should tell us that history is going to repeat itself if you never address what's at the core. And I think one of the things that you said in Sunday school this morning, because of course, my dad being the ever academic he is, ever educator that he is, he was talking about the fact that it seems like there's a spike in crime because a lot of the issues with the school system right now, post-COVID, not post-COVID, because we're still in COVID-related issues, but post-Hurricane Ida as well, I would say. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, some of the issues that are post-Hurricane Ida are post-Hurricane Katrina because they were never addressed. Right. You shift people around, you give them new titles, you change the names of the school districts, or you go to a charter school system, but if you never get at the core of the problem, you still have the problem.
Share a little bit about why Thibodeauxville is spelled the way it is.
Okay. So Thibodaux, Louisiana, founded by or established by Henry Schuyler Thibodeaux. So Henry Schuyler Thibodeaux apparently was remixing a lot of stuff. At one point, the name of our town was Thibodeauxville, and it had an E. And then at one time it was Thibodeauxville without the E. And then ultimately it landed, by the time of its, I guess, official establishment, we landed on Thibodaux without the E and no Ville. But all of those things, speak to the transformation, metamorphosis, all of the different iterations of our town that was founded by Henry Schuyler Thibodeaux, who also was a sugarcane grower and it owned enslaved people. If you look at the word Thibodeauxville on your shirt, the two L's are sugarcane stalks.
Yes,
so,
they are.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
So that's the very brief. We were changing and remixing it a lot.
I want to change it up just a little bit because I started off this interview playing Back That Thing Up by Juvenile.
Yes.
And this is a Why I Love New Orleans Focus podcast. So I guess 2 questions we're going to talk about, or 2 more topics before we shut it down. We're going to talk about that song and why I chose that song. And then I want to hear from you why you love New Orleans to close it out, or why you love Louisiana to close it out. So that song, I have heard you say many, many times that at your funeral, you want that song played.
Right. Well, everybody knows that Cash Money Records took over for the 99 in the 2000s. And this song has become a seminal part of hip hop history, I believe. But really and truly, how did I come to this? If I'm being completely serious, I came to this particular song. I love the song. I love Back That Thing Up, right? And I remember when I was in college in the 99, and I was that summer I went to Hawaii for an internship, and then later that year my sister got married. We were in Jamaica. We was bringing Juvie to Jamaica with us. So I would like to say that we introduced Juvenile to Jamaica, because they didn't know that song. They didn't know any of those songs before we got there. But in all seriousness, growing up in the South, I have had the unfortunate, I guess, experience of going to a lot of funerals, especially as a young person. And I seem to believe that sometimes, to be honest, it feels like we want people to break down. We want people to experience their most sad emotion. I remember thinking, I don't want that. I don't want my family members and my loved ones and my friends to be distraught. I don't want them to go through those feelings. And I especially think about that last time, like sometimes when you do the processional and you walk past that body for the last time before the casket closes. That it is gut wrenching for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I just remember like thinking, what if after they close the casket and they start pushing my body out of the church, the beat drops. And it's like, and I just felt like everybody would have to laugh. You can't tell me that visual wouldn't make you laugh if I'm backing that thing up, the casket, out of the church or what have you. That visual would make you laugh. And so that's what I wanted. I want people to laugh. I want people to remember, like, she a fool even in death. I want people to think that was her song, or what have you. But I just think it gives a moment of laughter and humor and levity, and it takes away that need to feel like you got to jump in the casket. So for me, it's like, play back that thing up, have a party. We are good about that in Louisiana as well with the whole second line tradition, but enjoy it. It's not end of physical life, isn't end of life. We're all energy. And even if whether you are science-based or religious-based or what have you, if we move out of this form into the next form, then it's not over. It's just changed. So let's celebrate the end of this form and the beginning of the next form, the new thing. And that's why I say play back that thing up at my funeral. Hopefully someone will see this and understand that really and truly it's about how do we think differently as the work that you're doing. How do we think differently about death? Let's think about it as a celebration of life. When I turned 40 years old, and I'm a few years past that now, but when I turned 40 years old, it allowed me the time to really reflect on the previous 40 years. There are things that I wish I could do differently, but overall, I'm like, I wrote it down. I was like, man, if I died tomorrow, I've lived a pretty amazing life.
No regrets, right?
Right. I've lived a great life.
My hope for you sharing that is to is that your comments and your reason for back that thing up. I hope that your comments encourage people to recognize that just like you have goals and you plan your life, you can plan your death, and you don't have to do it the way it's always been done. There are many, many more options now as far as how to dispose of your body, and you can be creative for your funeral. If you never choose to think about your death, which is inevitable for all of us, then you never have the opportunity to think about how you want to be remembered, how you want what message you want your funeral to have to people. And so I thank you for sharing that. And I thank you for, just stepping out of the box with your thought process regarding that.
Let's back that thing up. Something else that you just triggered my brain. So also about Thibodeauxville, in the grand scheme of things, I may never make a dime on any of those creative things that I do, but I do believe that this is a part of my legacy. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we all want to leave something behind to say, I was here. This
documentary will have a ripple effect, whether you make millions or whatever it is monetarily comes out of it, that in the big scheme, whatever money comes from it is not even the purpose of it.
Right.
And so that, as we say in Louisiana, that's the lagniappe, right?
That's the lagniappe.
Chrissy, one of the reasons I wanted to do or ask this question, why you love New Orleans, is because during Hurricane Ida, lots of people in my community here in Virginia were like asking questions about, why does anyone even live in New Orleans? There are hurricanes every year. There's crime. You got to repair your house. Like, why would anybody even want to live there? It's just like, really? There are issues everywhere, right? You lived in California. You experienced the earthquake, right?
I've experienced a lot of them.
So there are issues everywhere. So that's really why I wanted to start this series, because I wanted to address, why do you love New Orleans with all the issues that we have to deal with, the city that care for God. So let's start with that.
Because if you can point me to a perfect place, let me know, because I'd like to move there. So point me to the place where there are no natural disasters. Point me to the place where the education system is top notch. Because let's face it, as a country, we have undervalued public education. Or shall I say, we've devalued it as well. Point me to the place where there is no crime. But what I do know is there is nothing like Louisiana culture.
Nothing.
We have culture. We can speak to a history. Like I said, the city of New Orleans is older than the United States of America. We can speak to a history that is unlike anyone else. That's why you live there. And that's why I want the people who live there to understand their greatness, because if you don't watch it, somebody will tell you what your story is. Right. So going back to why I like to tell stories, somebody will tell you what your story is. They will tell you what your value is. They will tell you what you are or where you are not. It's up to you to know that and articulate it for yourself. Shape your own narrative, tell your own story in your own words. And that's what I hope for New Orleanians. Tell your story. Y'all can't be us. Louisianans, y'all can't be us.
It can't be us.
We different. We different. Even when I listen to bounce music, you know how long ago we were listening to bounce music, and now you have
so-called twerking.
So-called twerking, which was P-popping, and the P did not stand for principal popping. I don't know. This has been a part of who we are for so long. And then other people hear it. Okay, Chris Brown make a song, Drake make a song, City Girls make a song. Now it's the best thing. T.I. make a song. It's the best thing in the world. It's been the best thing in the world.
It's the best thing.
But we got to know it. We got to believe it. And we have to tell it to other people and not allow them to tell us who we are or whose we are. So that's why we live in Louisiana. But is, again, New Orleans is that beautiful amalgamation of all of these different cultures that comes together in, as we like to call it, a wonderful gumbo. You have, the Spanish influence, the French influence, the Native influence, the African influence, and you don't get New Orleans without any of those pieces, especially, and I'm going to go on and say it, especially without the African influence, because I know many years ago, people were really upset with Ray Nagin when he made the comment about New Orleans being a chocolate city. But what really and truly I believe he was trying to say is, you don't get the cuisine that we love so much without the influence of African and Native and Spanish and French, but without that African element. You don't get the music, the drum, when that beat drop, we all know that beat, you don't get bounce music and jazz and all of those things and blues. You don't get any of that without the African influence. And that's highly important. You cannot get around it or away from it. New Orleans is over 300 years old. It is older than the United States of America. And there is something very beautiful and special about it. Everything, the architecture, the way people talk, the
way people talk, the neutral ground.
The neutral ground, right? Chapatulas, and everything about it. Now, let me say this. I am very clear. I grew up in Thibodaux, Louisiana. I say it all the time. If someone should ask where is Thibodaux located, it's 60 miles southwest of New Orleans, about 75 miles southeast of Baton Rouge. I do not proclaim to be from New Orleans, Louisiana, because I know people from New Orleans, Louisiana are very serious about you proclaiming that you're from New Orleans if you're not. But I think it is the best American city there is. And I think it's beautiful. The people, the architecture, the food, the music, all of the culture, it is beautiful. And so to bring this whole thing full circle, in the very same way that I want my Thibodeauxville film to resonate with a young Thibodeaux and to know that, if she can do it, you can do it too, that we are a resilient people, that we are a people who don't sit down and just lay down and allow ourselves to be trampled on. We have fought for our rights. We have fought for justice and equality and equity in that same way. That is my hope and prayer for all Louisianans, but especially New Orleanians. As I go back home and I see the level of gentrification that is happening in New Orleans, I pray that people remember that it is a beautiful place. And sometimes when you're so close to a thing, you can't see it.
Right.
When you're so close up on something, you cannot actually see. You can't see the details. You can't see the picture. You can't see what really matters. New Orleans is a beautiful place. The people are beautiful there. And I feel like if only we knew our greatness, if only we knew who we are and whose we are, if only we knew that we are here for a purpose and that purpose is divine. And we don't have to kill each other. We don't have to take from each other. There's more than enough to go around. We have to learn how to work together to grow the pie instead of believing that there's only so many pieces of the pie and only certain people can have a slice. When it comes to Louisiana, when it comes to New Orleans, when it comes to Thibodaux, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, no matter where it is, I want us to get out of this zero-sum game mentality. I don't have to lose in order for you to win. You don't have to lose in order for me to win. We can win together. Again, gumbo is great because of all the ingredients, not just because of the seafood, not just because of the roux, not just because if you put okra in your gumbo, which that's where the word came from. So I feel like you kind of should, but
that African in us right there. That okra.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So that's what I want for that. That is what I wish for all Louisianans, but especially the beautiful people of New Orleans, that they see and understand how great they truly are. And thus they take care of that city. Because you often say, what, New Orleans is the city that cares for God? Yeah. take care of that city, because there's no replacing it. There's no replacing it.
Right.
There's nothing else in this country, much less in this, maybe some spots around the world that are very similar, but there's definitely nothing else in this country like it. So that's why I love New Orleans.
Thank you. And thank you for making time in your day. Want to ask that you share with people how they can learn more about Thibodeauxville, how they can find Thibodeauxville on social media. Please provide them with details about how they could purchase their own Thibodeauxville merch and anything else you want to share.
Yes, well, please go to our website first, www.thibodeauxvillefilm.com. That's THIBODEAUXVILLEFILM.com. And you can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Thibodeauxville or Thibodeauxville Film. So that's how you find us. And once you go to the website, there's an area that says support the film and shop, and you can purchase your own Thibodeauxville shirt as well.
And there you can also find out about the entire team of Black women, sister AKAs, and read their bios. I'm so proud of all of you for coming together, with your various backgrounds and skills to create something bigger than yourself. So thank you for your labor of love. Thank you for being here today.